This meeting is currently being recorded.
Okay, well, I guess we'll start with matters from the public.
Lee, can I go ahead and just call first?
Oh, go.
Yeah.
Attendance, yes, okay.
Lee Condor,
Yes.
Donna Chen, supposed to be here, she's not here yet.
Yeah.
Stuart Gardner,
Here.
Jose Hernandez.
There's a Jose Gomez, that would be me.
Jose Gomez, sorry,
That's okay.
my Hernandez. Patrick Healy,
Here.
Ethan, Kyle. Sarah Medley, she had a conflict, she couldn't come. Marty Meth.
Here
Oh, okay.
on Zoom.
Nathan Moore. Chapman Moon. Betsy is replaced by Danny, I think.
Here.
Yeah. Greg Weaver.
Here.
Okay. Sandy is here. And Chuck Charles. And Zoom.
Yes, I'm
Chuck?
here.
Now you're welcome to keep going.
Yeah, since we don't have a quorum present, we can't include the people online as voting members.
That's right.
That's all right. We can see by anyway. So matters from the public, if there are any. Don't see any, nobody online. Speak up now or forever hold your peace. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we can review and accept the agenda. That doesn't take a vote, but looks fine. However, we can't approve the minutes from the September 18th meeting, but there was a correction that was noted. Chuck wasn't included somehow. So you already took care of that, or somebody took care of it.
Yes. Sandy, yeah.
All right. So I guess we'll move on to new business, safe streets for all. Sarah, you're up.
Yeah, it's gonna be Brian. I'm gonna share my screen. I have to figure out which one is which. Is it this one, right? Like that. Oh.
There we go.
All right, thank you. My name is Goran Georgievsky, a regional planner at the TJPDC. Today I'm going to be presenting about the Move Safely Blue Ridge, which is the region's plan to reduce roadway fatalities and serious injuries for all road users, no matter their choice of transportation. I have to emphasize this is a regional project, so it covers all the localities within the TJPDC region, which is Fluvanna, Green, Louisa, Nelson, as well as Albemarle and Charlottesville. Next slide, please. And I think to the right, so down.
It's not right.
Click on the packet. This grant comes from the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, which is a federal program, and supports the United States Department of Transportation National Roadway Strategy. The long-term goal of this approach is 0 fatalities and serious injuries using that same safe system approach. Next slide, please. So for the project that we're doing, we're collecting data for the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan, which the data comes from VDOT, and it's based on 13 emphasis areas. Examples include roadway departure, speeding, impaired driving, not wearing a seatbelt, and then 2 new emphasis areas that were added to the project: work zones and farm vehicles. Next slide, please. It's important to note that these emphasis areas are the factors contributing to roadway fatalities and serious injuries, and they correspond with each other. So what that means is that if someone was under the influence and was not wearing a seatbelt, but also had a roadway departure, they will fall in all 3 categories.
So some are more than counted once.
Exactly, yeah. Next slide, please. A safety action plan includes key components, which were identified at the beginning of the project. This includes strong leadership, an oversight group for development and monitoring, thorough safety data analysis, active public stakeholders engagement, and inclusive planning process. But we also prioritize evaluating processes and policies, identifying key projects and strategies, and maintaining ongoing monitoring and reporting to ensure continuous improvement. Next slide, please. A little bit about the funding for this project. So the total for this project is a little bit over $1 million, from which $857,000 come from the federal grant, or FHWA, Fire Administration. Around 214 come from the localities. And the comprehensive structure supports various regional components assessed on per capita basis. That ensures equitable distribution aligned with each jurisdiction's scope of work. Just to look at the specific components for Albemarle and Charlottesville. For Albemarle is 84,000, from which 33 are for public engagement, while Charlottesville 205,000, from which 121 is estimated for a charrette and project design demo, as well as public engagement. I also added the other localities components here, just for your reference. The solutions for this safety action plan are integrated across the 4E's safety system approach. That is designing safer facilities through engineering, building a culture of traffic safety through education, reinforcing safe travel behaviors through enforcement, and saving lives through emergency response. The process is divided into 4 steps. The first step is identifying issues and opportunities. So during the spring of this year, we completed this step through extensive public engagement. We conducted a survey that allowed residents of the jurisdiction to share their specific transportation concerns. Step 2 consists of gathering data from site visits, which we conducted in each jurisdiction, and that was completed in September of this year, so just recently. And now we're asking the public for feedback once more, but I will talk about this a little more in the next slides. Step 3 will consist of development of targeted safety strategies based on the identified priorities in collaboration with jurisdictions. So these strategies will serve as the foundation for the final step, which is the development of a comprehensive safety action plan, which will outline specific actions and measures to enhance transportation safety in the region. Next slide, please. So in round 1 of engagement, in addition to the survey, we held 6 in-person public meetings, 1 in each jurisdiction, 1 virtual meeting for all jurisdictions. We organized 21 pop-up events across the jurisdictions, and as well as the site visits where we observed and collected crash data from various locations within the specific jurisdictions. And that data was based on the high injury network. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about the survey results that we had. We had over 300 plus responses. We learned that the driver behavior is a concern. I have to say this overlaps with what was heard at the Governor's Transportation Conference in Norfolk by various experts, that they agreed driver behavior is one of the biggest concerns for safety in transportation. I'm not gonna go through the rest of the survey data, but it is included for your reference in this presentation. You can just go to the next slide. So we have survey results overviews, response highlights for Albemarle and Charlottesville as well. Keep going to one more slide. One more. Yep, thank you. So I mentioned in September, we conducted 6 site visits, 1 per jurisdiction. We observed multiple locations in the jurisdiction where we gathered crash data from the high injury network. We took that data to identify potential solutions based on those findings. And we currently launched round 2 of engagement, where we're asking the public for their opinion once more. The key here is what are the types of projects they think will help improve roadway safety in the community. This is again done through pop-up events that are conducted within the jurisdictions. And we're doing them from November 11th to November 23rd. And the feedback is also gathered through a survey, but the survey is open until December 6th. I highly encourage each and every one of you to take time and fill out the survey, but also share that survey with anybody that you know that lives or commutes, not just in Charlottesville or Albemarle, but within the TJPDC region. Next slide, please.
Give me the URL that survey link goes to.
Yes, what I can do is I can post it in the chat.
Would you be able to send it out?
It's
Yeah.
attached to the document too.
Yeah, we can definitely send it out.
But it is
via
attached
email.
to the PDF.
Oh, okay.
The
The one that you
packet,
sent.
right, that one is correct, yeah.
If you don't mind, it could be helpful to, if we're gonna share it with folks on the networks, having something that's like packaged, like a blurb or something.
Sure.
If you have something.
We had a social media post from TJPDC, so perhaps that could be the.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So a little bit about the technical stuff of the project. So the high injury network highlights roadway segments with disproportionately high number of severe crashes. For example, in the region, 70% of fatal and crashes and serious injuries occur on just 6% of the roadway mileage. This analysis breaks roadway segments into 0.1 mile segments, but also uses a sliding window analysis that evaluates 0.5 mile segments that meet minimum crash criteria. Each jurisdiction had a customized approach to identify this high injury segment. So in the next slides, I'm going to talk about specifically about Albemarle and Charlottesville. But before that, I want to talk about what the terms mean. So the terms that you see on the screen is 2K. Well, it's a little bit you can't really see it well, but the terms are 2KA, 3KA, and then there's 2KAB and 3KAB. So What those terms mean is they refer to different criteria used to classify the severity of the crash in the high-injury network. What they generally mean is 2KA crashes includes K, fatal, and A, severe injury crash that involves at least 2 or more crashes within a mile segment. This represents broader and more inclusive network where more crashes are counted. 3KA includes K, fatal, A, severe injury crash, but limits the focus to 3 or more crashes within a segment. This represents a more narrowly defined network, focusing on areas with a higher concentration of severe crashes. The same goes for 2KAB crashes and 3KAB crashes, but in this case, the B represents minor injuries. At the end of all this, 3KA is a smaller subset of high injury areas, including more precise locations with very frequent and severe crashes, while 2KA is a broader set of location with slightly less stringent crash frequency criteria. Next slide, please. So we can look at the example for Albemarle County, which 3KA covers 3% of the roadway, but accounts for 47% of the crashes, while 2KA covers 7% of the roadway, but accounts for 72% of the crashes. Next slide, please. Charlottesville is a little bit different. It does not have a 3KA. It has 2KA, but also has 3KAB. In this case, 14%, for 2KA, 14% of the road accounts for 77% of the crashes, while 3KAB covers 17% of the road, but contributes to 84% of the crashes.
I have a question. So here, each jurisdiction selects their own criteria for what's defined as a private.
Yes, so I was not part of those meetings, but Sarah was. Those meetings were done with each jurisdiction separately, where both TJPDC, our consultant, and the jurisdictions agreed on which criteria they would use.
So in the Charlottesville case, is there any overlap for segments that are both 2KA and 3KAB? Because it seems like there could be segments that qualify for both of these categories, right? They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they're not exclusive. They do overlap.
But then what color would they have been coded? You know
Well,
what I'm saying?
Yeah, that is a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer at the moment, but I can definitely follow up on that.
Well, all 2KA crashes would be, or all 3KAB crashes would be 2KA crashes.
Right.
Well, they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is not a very informative graph.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, I mean, and like, if we're gonna report metrics, like percentage crashes, it seems like, but this is not like a good capture of that because.
Yeah, you're right.
If it didn't have the B, it would.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll follow up on that question a little bit in more details. Were there any other questions in the meantime?
Well, I guess along the same lines too, because some of the segments in purple also be only B, like if they had only B crashes.
Yeah,
three
Yeah.
B crashes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the site visits that we did, a lot of the data that happened, or a lot of the data that we collected overlapped with each other. For example, at the same location, there was multiple 2KAs or 3KAs or.
How is this used in practice? And is there, it sounds like Albemarle at some point decided 3KA was a more informative metric and Charlottesville stakeholders decided to add the B. I guess I'm just curious, like how do you turn this into action planning?
Be good for them to say how they end up there. Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, exactly. I would agree it would be helpful, because maybe in the context of Charlottesville, minor injuries are more indicative of, I don't know, is this informing where you do infrastructure investment and things like that? Just because I guess we tend to have lower speeds.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I can definitely follow up on those questions. I don't have that information right now. We can move on to the next slide. So just the brief overview of the plan development and engagement that we're using. We have 4 segments of plan development in which we're collecting and analyzing data, conducting site visits, prioritize strategies and projects, and draft and revise the safety action plan. So these 4 segments are supported by 3 rounds of public engagement, where we ask feedback from various groups of people, like the public and the jurisdictional leadership. Next slide. That's all I had on the presentation. I'll be happy to take any additional questions.
On one of the earlier slides, it mentions, I'm just going to point out Charlottesville because that's what I'm most familiar with, 121,000 estimated for Sheraton project of design demonstration. I'm curious about the project design demonstration.
So that is a great question. That is ongoing currently, but I believe there hasn't been any decision made in how that's going to look like. Okay. But I think we are in the final steps of discussing that. I'll be happy to tell you more.
So is the idea it's going to be like an on-the-ground pilot to try something out and see how it goes?
Yes, yeah. I had the feeling that it's gonna be more like a public meeting,
okay,
rather than like a pilot on the ground.
Nice. Thanks.
Also on that slide, I had a question. There was a reference to per capita or proportionality in the assessments. And Charlottesville was way ahead in money spent. So was that just a choice by city council? Or because the population of Charlottesville is, I don't think, greater than Albemarle County. And yet the city had substantially more money on the table.
That is a good question. But I believe Sandy might have a better idea on how to.
Are you talking about this slide right here where how much funding was contributed?
Yeah.
That was a choice. The city asked for specific
because the city wants, for instance, this design program.
Correct.
Okay.
So they put extra
That's
funding
kind of
towards that. Yeah.
So they would to meet criteria, they would have contributed a good deal less than that. But since they wanted these other things, they're paying for it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How much of this framework is driven by like the funding? You said this like to qualify for, I think, bipartisan infrastructure law funding. Yeah,
so the goal for this is in the future to give opportunity for implementation grants.
Okay.
Based on the comprehensive safety action plan. Because at the end of this plan, there is certain deadlines that we have to meet by the end of February. We have to have the draft safety action plan completed by the end of April. This has to be reviewed and finalized, and then by June 30th, it has to be approved by the boards. And then by September, end of September, we have to submit the final action plan to FHWA.
And a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
With that in mind, how much does then this effort overlap with like parallel efforts in each locality? Or is this basically what carries the water for broader efforts to like do like Vision Zero type efforts and pedestrian safety and stuff like that? Like, are those in parallel? Or is it like a Venn diagram? Or does the other thing not happen? Yeah.
Well, this I think will focus less on like doing large projects that will require a lot of resources and time, but rather than implementing short, like not short term, but long term smaller solutions. For example, in some cases, doing rumble strips or stuff like that.
That said, there is opportunity to carry the findings from the study into other like efforts, but like Orion said, the kind of level of project design that's going to be available during this planning process is not going to be sufficient to apply for like a lot of the VDOT grants, but it could help identify priority locations where maybe a bigger study or effort might be needed. So the goal would be not to like repeat efforts, but to find how they dovetail together.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important for all the stakeholders to have that discussion so we can focus on different efforts, so we don't have like repetition on work and time.
And that's how during the like high entry networks determination, like city staff, VDOT, they have to talk and see why would this location be part of the network. So it's to avoid that overlapping over time.
Is there any plan to consider or to normalize the data for the accidents based on vehicle miles? Because you know, I was looking at the map. I mean, obviously 29 and 74 and Route 20 have the most accidents, but they also have the most traffic. So if you take accidents per vehicle mile, then maybe there are other trouble spots that this analysis might overlook. In other words, well, I guess if you're trying to reduce absolute fatalities and serious accidents, then you focus on the most used roads. But yeah, I mean, then that's where the attention's going to be, at least for the county, is going to be on 29, 20, and 250 and 64.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the survey responses that we had in round one focused specifically on those roads by the public.
Well, that's because that's what people drive on.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Do you know, Gloria, when they did the methodologies, did they use the overall number of crashes or the crash rate? Do you know?
No.
Looks like overall number of crashes.
Looks like it's crashes per mile of roadway versus per mile traveled.
Right.
Yeah.
Could you go back to whatever is the third slide, just the categories, or it was
The emphasis area.
Here.
yeah, just for a second, just curious.
While I was looking at that, I had a question about this too. What are these used for? Is it tracking?
Yeah, so these areas were used for gathering data. So we took these areas and from 2018 to 2022, the data that VDOT had, and to use it in this plan. Because I don't think the data for 2023 was available at that time.
So you have the level of information in the database to basically inform whether there was an aging road user.
These come from police crash reports. So
okay.
All of the detail is collected on the vehicle and the occupants are in that crash report. Yeah.
And so does that mean in that particular case, where it's noted, it could inform the data, but there could be an omission?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And there could also be, like, not necessarily here, but so actually the injury severity is rated at the time by whoever's taking the report. So some things are obvious.
I see.
Someone passes away, that's obvious, but the delineation between minor injury and major injury is sometimes like a judgment call.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
It's also tough because intersections looks like, you know, the biggest for Albemarle, but it could be because someone was intoxicated and young, like,
Right.
you don't see the full story necessarily. But I get that's difficult to try to measure what the leading cause was.
Yeah, especially, as I said earlier, somebody that had like fall into three categories will be counted
Yeah.
here, so.
It's interesting that like some of these are modal, a lot of them are behavioral. Intersections is maybe the only that's like infrastructure, insight into infrastructure. Just because it's on my mind. One thing I think would be interesting would be something about level of infrastructure. So particularly if you look at an overlay of bicyclists and pedestrians, like what is the level of infrastructure that was in place? Like, was there a bike lane? Was there a sidewalk? Again, like if this is used to make informed decisions, where that's an overlap, to me again would scream like this is an area of need.
So I think all of this in the VDOT database is GIS coded, so you could go in and say, here are all the bicyclist crashes. If there's a cluster of them somewhere, you can go in and look at the type of infrastructure that is provided. It's obviously not the purpose of this graphic, but I think that information is totally available.
That's what I was wondering, yeah. And I mean, it's probably all in front of our minds, like right now, right in the past month, so it's kind of hard not to think about.
That's also something that would definitely be done when you're doing like a corridor study or an intersection study to do a safety improvement. I don't know that anybody's quantifying it on like a large.
I find it interesting that roadway departures are such a huge thing, especially in the county, in Albemarle County. I mean, that's a lot of people running off the road. I mean, that's clearly driver error 99% of the time. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I have to say for that one, there's also like running into animals included there, roadway departures. Most of them will be because of deer, probably.
or severe inclement, rather lice or that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Too, but still, but it's almost half again as much as intersections is surprising.
And the thing that's missing here is distracted driving. I can't remember the last time I didn't see someone texting while driving. I don't know how you know.
Well, I could certainly
prove
run
that, but
roadway departures too. Yeah.
I mean,
That's a subcategory of behavior.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not the category.
It is a form of impairment. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's where it's being captured.
But again, like the police would have had to observe that happen versus coming after the crash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your
Yeah.
information.
Sorry, I was not able to answer all questions right now.
All right, I guess Chuck, Sandy, you're up.
I will defer to Chuck.
Go ahead, Chuck. We see your screen.
He's on mute.
Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay. Okay, I've got three different presentations. The first one's on the Fifth Street, or this is stars. Hold on, let me see. I'll do this one first. Basically, we've got star studies coming up and pipeline studies. The star studies are just kicking off now. The pipeline studies, we're still working on getting them approved. So those will be coming probably starting in the spring. Basically, the program, give you a brief overview of the programs and the locations and then of each of the studies. Basically, this is a comparison of the two different programs. STARS has been around since the early 2000s. We had some of the first ones in the district or in the state, was on 53 and Route 20 north. But basically, it looks at strategically targeted improvements to the roadway, as well as intersection improvements. But basically, it's a streamlined process that we've developed over time to go through and identify where the problems are, get feedback from the different stakeholders groups, whether it's the VDOT itself, the localities, law enforcement, transit agencies, the residency, the maintenance folks that are out there, and get feedback from everybody to come up with what the problems are, and then identify solutions for those problems. Basically, we have a kickoff meeting, which we're trying to work those out right now, where we flush out what the scope of the project's going to be, or the scope of the study is going to be, and sort of get a diagnosis of what the problems are out there. And then we'll go through and do the study after that, once we flush out how we're going to do, how this study is going to go and what pieces need to be included. We're working through those right now. And the pipeline is sort of a rigid program that came about when OIP wanted to look at how to address, study the VTrans Tier 1 needs, which are our state highway plan. And they wanted to have a program to basically study those areas that were identified in the state highway plan as high priority needs. So they developed this process from the STAR study. And it's really similar. They just break it down into 3 different sections. The first one is your kickoff meeting, where you're doing some preliminary data collection, bouncing it off your stakeholders group. And then the second phase is basically you look at alternatives. And then the third phase is finalizing your alternative, your preferred alternative. And through this process, we do have public outreach in 2 different areas. Generally, it's in the beginning, early on, to get feedback on what the problems are. And then right before stage 3, or near the end of this STAR study, where you're basically have your menagerie of alternatives and you want to try to get feedback on what is the preferred alternative. But basically, that's the 2 study programs. Any questions about that?
Well,
okay. Currently, we're looking at 2 studies, or 3 studies in the Charlottesville MPO area. One of them's in the city. It's well, let me go down the list. The first one is the hydraulic 29 Emmett Street interchange, right there, where we basically haven't studied that. It's been studied before, but we didn't study it with the Solutions 29 package of projects. So we're pulling that out as a separate study. We're going to look at it to try to see what we can do to solve that issue at the interchange, as well as we weren't able to we had to pull the Angus Road intersection out of the previously funded study. So we're going to look at that again. And we're also going to look at hydraulic and 29. We're also going to look at that corridor from Barracks Road all the way through hydraulic. That study shows up as a high safety need corridor. So we want to look at that to see what we can do to try to address the multimodal aspects of that corridor, to see if we can provide any recommendations for that, improvements to that corridor. The second corridor is from hydraulic north to Woodbrook. Greenbrier and Woodbrook are 2 very high crash locations, as well as there's a number of high priority segments, high crash location segments on that corridor that we want to try to look at to see how we can come up with a method for improving that. With the Solutions 29, we looked at RIO, and we looked at, from a high level, the rest of the corridor, but we didn't really get into the weeds as much as we would like to, because we had a limited amount of resources. So what we're going to try to do here is do a more detailed look at this corridor to see if we can come up with some solutions to address the issues on the corridor from a multimodal perspective, to include transit and bike and pedestrian facilities. The last one is a city location in the city at Ridge and McIntyre and West Main Street. The city had looked at it before and it submitted it for funding, and then they pulled the project. So we're going to relook at that. We wanted to actually identify a location in this that's specifically in the city where we could develop the criteria for doing additional studies in the city with the city. So that's what that intersection's there. Sandy's taking charge on a number of these. I'm going to work with her on the 29 corridor, and she's going to focus on the Ridge McIntyre intersection specifically. So any questions about those?
I have a quick question. How are these chosen? Is it the localities propose them? Or you kind of huddle
We
up?
look at the data for mainly safety data. But we're also looking at the congestion data and where the worst locations are, and that's how they're come up with. And then we work with the locality on making sure that they're on board with these corridors as locations for study.
We also reviewed these against the long-range transportation plan to make sure that they were priorities that were identified in that document.
Is there a direct way for like the public to weigh in on this, or is it more derivative of these other studies?
You mean to weigh in on which locations are chosen, or
exactly? Yeah, like to choose a different number 2 or a different number 3.
That's not part of the process, Chuck. Do you want to?
And we looked at that. 2 and 3 were basically 3 was we worked just talked to the county, the city about that one. But it does show up as a high priority intersection location in the city.
Oh yeah, and I didn't mean to suggest those weren't good.
Yeah.
I was just curious. You know, for example, I have my own biases, right? But I would suggest like the whole West Main Street corridor, right? And so
I agree with you on that. We wanted to pick a location in the city where we could identify and work out the details on how we're going to do the studies. And then in the next round, we'll come back and we'll look at other corridors on a larger scale. Because basically that section of, I think it's Emmett Street, in the middle of UVA is probably one of the highest crash corridors in the city. Basically from the railroad underpass east or west. So, I mean, we want to look at some of those in the future, but right now we wanted to set up the guidelines for how we're going to do some of these studies because they've been pretty much doing most of their own studies and we haven't been really participating in those very much. So this is another funding stream that they can have access to do some of these studies, and we can provide the consultant services to help them do that. But we want to make sure we're agreeable on the methodology and the criteria that we're using for the study first.
But also to answer your question, that is something that's important to keep in mind when you're engaging.
I was going to ask, why, it's not even if I'm on Zoom, why is it that 29 is a multi-mode? Isn't it basically a traffic issue? How does the multi-mode adding bikes make it any better? Because you don't see bikes here. You don't see people walking.
Well, that's going to be part of the discussion. Do we want to consider multimodalism on that corridor? I mean, we've got to figure out a way to get bikes and pedestrians across the corridor because it's a barrier right now. And how can we do that most efficiently and safely? The other thing is there's not a lot of corridors where we can have that occur. And I think in the city's current plan, they were originally proposing a multimodal facility along the 29 corridor. Now, there's been some discussion recently about possibly looking at other corridors, parallel corridors for that. So that's going to be part of the discussion. But the biggest thing is, I think we need to consider is transit and how we can maybe start to work on how BRT might be able to effectively work this corridor. And is there anything that we can look at as we develop improvements for this corridor that could facilitate that future method of transportation along this corridor?
do you have you looked at micro transit and to see if that's reduced accidents? Are they tracking what's happening with that on that corridor? Because that's a busy corridor. Nice.
I haven't looked at that
Micro
corridor.
path?
I've only looked at the crash data.
Okay. Okay.
And the crash data probably doesn't include the time frame then that microtransit has been implemented, but that should show up in the data. You know, once we start closing those years out and have access to that information.
Okay, thank you.
We originally looked at the same data set that the Safe Streets for All looked at, the 18 to 22 data.
So this entire process, the study process phasing, this will be done over the course of a year since this is an annual program, or how does that work?
And we're hoping to get it wrapped up before the next round of Smart Scale, so we can have applications for Smart Scale if the locality wants to submit those. So basically, we're looking at about an 18-month schedule. All right, now the pipeline studies. Like I said, these are the locations that we have in the MPO area. One of them is the 118 interchange. We're starting to see issues with that now, whereas that southbound left turn movement is queuing up, and especially during the PM, it backs up pretty significantly in the southbound direction. In some instances, almost all the way to Old Ivy Road, which is significant. So we want to figure out how we can better solve that issue. This is also one of the locations I think that the county was considering looking at Safe Streets for All grant. And in talking with them, they're mainly looking at more short-term, low-cost solutions, where this would be more looking at the long-term interchange improvements that might be needed at this location to actually make it function better. It's been looked at a couple of times. We funded it and broke it up into different pieces. I think the original concept was looked at in round one, but the cost was like almost $200 million to do the interchange improvement. So we want to relook at it to see if there's anything else we can do here that's less expensive and still provide us the same level of service that we can get out of that we've had in the past. And then the other one is the 5th Street interchange. It was submitted this round. We're still going through the process of scoring it and validating the application. The cost estimate was pretty high. And it ended up costing more than what we thought it was going to be. So we're concerned that it's not going to get funded. So we wanted to relook at it. We're also the 5th Street Station intersection, that corridor just north into the city, was submitted previously by the MPO, but it wasn't eligible for submission by the MPO this time because of changes in the Smart Scale regulations. So we want to relook at that. The city is also looking at changing what they want to do on 5th Street north of this study area. So we want to make sure that what we're going to do for this portion of it is going to be reflective of what the city wants to do in their portion of it, the portion to the north. So that's why that study's on there. So those were the two locations in the MPO area that we're basically focusing our efforts on.
I have a quick question. So for these, like, for example, the 5th Street Station, I-64 DDI, so that, like, the scope, I guess, the study area will just include that area, or would they consider things that impact traffic patterns in that area beyond the box that's been drawn on this map? So like here, a lot of the traffic on, I think it's Avon Extended, right? If they're trying to get on 64, they've got to come through the 5th Street Station Shopping Center, or what is it called? I forget.
Yeah, yeah, the street station.
5th Street Station Street Parkway.
Yeah.
Like, part of that traffic is not necessarily like solvable at the intersection level, really has to do with the demand like upstream, right?
That's been looked at in the past. I know the MPO did a study probably 10 years ago. They looked at 3 different corridors. They looked at the corridor that's currently there. They looked at Cherry Street, and they also looked at a corridor to the south. The problem is there's very few connections between Avon Street and Fish Street, and that's been a problem. You've got the fire station on Monticello, across from Monticello High School, and it services all this whole area. So they don't have a direct connection. They have to basically go up to Route 20 and take the interstate over until this other connection was made. Now they basically use that connection to get across to Fifth Street. So we weren't going to look at that as part of this. We're mainly focused on the intersection itself because the Fifth Street Station intersection doesn't work at all. And it's going to get worse over time. So we're going to basically study from Harris Road, I think it is, which is just north of this intersection, all the way through the interchange. But I understand what you're saying is that's more of a bigger study than what we were going to undertake with this.
Yeah, it just seems like, especially with all that development on Avon Street extended, this isn't going to get any better because it's the only way we can get on 54.
Yeah, I mean, there was a proposal to run, I think it's Mill Creek Parkway across and tie in to Fish Street Station or Fish Street further to the south. Can't remember exactly where. It had two locations it came out at. One of them was opposite Sunset, and I can't remember where the other one came out at. But there's some plans that were sketched out at one point for several alternatives south of 64 for that to be a connection. It's not something that the county pursued when they after they got the results of the study that the MPO did before. Because right now, Mill Creek Parkway just goes down and dead ends.
Right.
So it can be extended across if the county wants to look at that as a future alternative connection across.
Are you considering any of the things that are in that part of the Fifth Street corridor that relate to the city's recent upzoning? Where things are like, probably not immediately, but at some point in the future. Things like small office park structures could become 6 or even 8-story apartment buildings.
We'll have to cross that bridge when we get into a forecast. We haven't really thought about that. The main reason we're looking at this is because if we don't get the Fifth Street interchange funded, then we're going to have to look at a different alternative. And to do that, I need to update the study. And the study's got a process it's got to go through that involves approval by FHWA. So we're going to look at an alternative of the DDI without the shared use path. We'll get into that when we get to the Divergent Diamond portion of one of the other presentations I'm going to be doing in a few minutes. Where I'll get into why we're looking at that.
I could be completely off base here, but could upzoning potentially reduce the impact of traffic here if you're moving people closer to their employment centers? To me, both like the city is within the traffic issues here, and so you bring more people within the intersection, so then potentially have fewer people trying to leave the area. Assuming you have an equal number of people employed in the city who need to work there, if you have more residents in the city, that helps solve this issue, right?
That could happen, but heretofore it has not happened. So whether that trend continues or what you're suggesting.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Someone who knows more about this would need to forecast it. But I was just curious, like I wonder if it could go.
I live right there, and Beacon on Fifth Street, which is a little town community they put in. Those people all come out of there and get the interstate and go wherever they work.
Yeah, Wegmans is a regional draw, so it's going to get people not only from the area, but it's going to get people from all over the county.
And that trend may not continue, but that's how it works pretty much every time.
Yeah.
Heretofore.
Chuck, did you say you're considering doing away with the mixed use path that was previously part of that area? Right.
We're not necessarily getting rid of it. We're going to look at it as a separate structure.
Oh, the shared use, yeah, the shared use path, yeah.
Yeah. Basically, we put it on the structure. And I mean, I'll get to it when we do the other one, but I'll give you a short scenario of what we're going to talk about. Basically, the cost of the structure went basically almost doubled or tripled the cost of the project. Because we're basically having to replace the entire bridge. If I had known we were going to have to replace the entire bridge earlier in the study, we would have done this before. But we didn't find out until late in the process that it was going to require full bridge replacement. So what we're going to try to do with this revised scenario is basically do minimal impacts to the bridge and put the shared use path on a separate structure just to the west of the bridge. So hopefully we can bring down the cost of the application.
Like a consistent narrative is we have development and then the transportation systems are the ones cleaning up the mess as a result of building a huge shopping center with only really one or two ways to get into it. And it's like, we find another area and we build there, but then we don't take into consideration how people get there or get away from there. We're not going to solve that right now, but it just seems like a consistent narrative.
Some regions do charge like a development fee tax on like the developments because they're going to be generating the traffic, but it's controversial.
Yeah.
We do, the county can do that to a certain extent. I mean, they do that for residential. I think they do that commercial. It's got to do with the proffers that they're allowed to get from the developer. But that's, and we look at that. They do traffic impact analysis when they first come in, when there's a rezoning of the property. But after that, depending on how well we do on the identifying what the impacts are, and it doesn't really look at, it does look at transit to a certain extent, but it's more of just a reduction in trips or diversion of trips. It doesn't really get into, there's a lot of flaws in it, so to speak. So we do our best. And they did come up with improvements for this corridor that they did provide, and they did do the improvements at the intersection and built the roads into there and made the intersection improvements. Beyond that, there's limits that we can, they're responsible for according to the current laws.
Can I ask a question about the shared use path again? So if that is split off into a separate bridge structure, would that then be split off into a separate project? In other words, would that happen after this kind of interchange project, or would that happen at the same time?
I want to keep it together because it would be harder to build it afterwards as a separate project.
Gotcha.
So I want to basically just look at it as a separate alternative.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I know multiple people who want to bike from that side to the University of Virginia where they work, but it's too dangerous. So I think that would help.
Oh yeah, this was identified several years ago in a previous study we did of the whole corridor. And getting across this structure was something that we addressed in both short term and long term. The diversion diamond with the shared use path was the preferred alternative at coming out of that study. And that's why we looked at that and submitted as a small scale application this round. It's just the cost is going to probably not make it fundable. So we got to figure out a way to get the same improvement at a less cost. And that's what this study is going to try to do. I think that's it. I think we went through. Anybody got any other questions about this one?
You said the shared use was going to be west of the bridge?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at right now. It runs down the middle of the bridge. And the county's got a shared use path that's coming up on the north side that's coming across from Old Lynchburg Road. And they're going to connect to the shared use path that we're going to build on that west side, and then you can cross at the interchange. And then on the south side, the facilities that we're tying into are on the west side of Fish Street. So on the north, once we get to the north side of the bridge, we're going to have to cross the road, and we'll cross at the interchange.
Isn't there a current path? Yeah, there is a current path down there on the east side of the bridge. Which connects to the land at the street station shopping center.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're going to basically tie, there's a trail that runs just north of the shopping center where the Holiday Inn is. There's a trailhead that comes in there. We're going to basically start there and go south, then cross the road at the interchange, and then cross the 64 on the west side, and then continue south on the west side of the Fish Street.
And that would be on grade, or would you still be below grade there? Road grade.
You will be at the road grade.
Okay. Yeah, because those the path you reference feeds 3 and potentially 4 major subdivisions.
Yeah, I'll jump to that
as well as
the presentation.
This that run the park, so that would be a real home run if you could put all of those together.
All right, let me find the other presentation. I'll switch to that presentation so you can see the Fish Street. It's just taking time for it to load. There it is. Probably should have stopped sharing and then reshared. There it goes. All right, can you see my screen again?
I can, Chuck.
Okay. All right, this is the cost estimate presentation we did for CTAC or for the MPO Tech and MPO Policy Board. It's the same material, just I'm presenting it. Basically go through how the project was done, but we can also talk about the alternatives. This is the process we went through, which is standard for a STARS type study that we went through for this one. We did a compressed schedule, and that's why one of the reasons we ended up not being able to look at a different alternative, because by the time we got to the cost estimate, didn't have enough time to go back and make any changes to it at that time. But basically everybody that's included, which is the same as what I outlined in the other studies. Here are some of the issues that we identified: was high crash location, long queues, operational concerns at the intersections. It was causing queuing back onto 64. So the goal was to basically fix the safety and operations and also provide that multimodal access across the bridge for pedestrians. We looked at the 4 different scenarios that you can see at the bottom during the study. We had some changes. Here are the different things that we looked at and the differences between the various alternatives that we looked at. The divergent diamond was identified as the preferred alternative. So that's the one we moved forward with. And the bottom is the changes in the smart scale scoring methodology from this round. They changed it so we don't get land use score. It's a multiplier, so it doesn't have as much weight as it did before. So the shared use multimodal effects aren't as impactful as they were previous to this. Okay, here's the interchange, what was submitted. As you can see, the shared use path runs along the south or the bottom of the screen to the interchange, crosses the bridge in the middle of the bridge, center of the bridge, and then crosses and runs down the north side of the road on the west side of the bridge. Basically, what we're proposing to do is cross instead of going down the middle. We'll just cross the interchange and then go down the west side of the bridge, parallel to the bridge. And by doing that, we wouldn't have to do as much reconfiguration on the bridge itself, and minimize the impacts to the existing bridge to almost a minimal impact. We've done this in, I know when we did the bridge at Zion's Crossroads, we basically did the intersection modifications on either end, but we didn't even touch the bridges at all for that one. And I'm hoping we can do the same thing here. We might have to do a little bit of the median modification to allow for the crossing movements to occur at either end, but that's going to be about it.
How do you cross from one side to the other with the light?
There will be a signal. There would be a signal at these locations, so you could cross at the signals. Right now, it's signaled on the top side on both sides, but when the signal stops, everybody stops, and we could put the phase in for that crossing movement for both sides of the road. So it'd still be a two-stage crossing, but we can stage it so that you're crossing basically you have the control. You don't have to worry about traffic. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And is there street lighting around there?
We will have street lighting included in the application.
Thank you.
And this is the plan that was put forth with the current bridge, but there'll be a new bridge. Will that bridge be wider to accompany or to better accommodate these changes?
Doesn't really, what we're not going to put in this application is for this improvement. If it's not funded, we're going to come back and resubmit it as a separate structure. But we don't know how it's going to score, and I don't want to wait and see how it's going to score before I start looking at how we can fix it. Because to do this, I have to go to FHWA, I have to redo the framework document because it involves the interstate interchange, and it's a long process, and I don't want to have to wait to do that separately in the future. I'd rather do it now, and that way it gives me enough time to look at the alternative in detail and get FHWA to support and buy in on it.
And is that a shared use path?
Currently, it runs down the middle of the bridge and crosses on the west side and continues west, and crosses on the east side and continues east. And it ties into the existing, the proposed shared use facility that's already funded and it's under design is where we're basically tying into on the north side or east side. But like I said, there's some, when we started getting into the details of this project, from the cost estimating standpoint, Initially, they were basically going to replace the deck, but once they started looking at the construction and the design of the existing structure, there's a joint that runs down the middle of the bridge, the full length of the bridge. And it was basically not going to allow us to put the shared use path in the middle of the bridge. So basically, to accommodate that, we actually have to replace the deck. And then when we started looking at the substructure, it became apparent that any new deck would have to be integrated into the substructure. So the substructure had to be redesigned too and rebuilt. So that meant a full bridge replacement, which is not what we expected at all when we started out down this path. And this is the current estimate for the project, 170 or 79 million, which is way above what we thought it was going to be. Just for to incorporate the extra cost for the bridge replacement. And like I said, when we went through this process, we went through, and this is sort of a timeline. We started it in the fall, and then we got to the preferred alternatives in the spring. And then we started the final evaluation in late spring. And by the time we got to the cost estimate, we were already in July. We didn't have enough time to go back and make the changes to the preferred alternative and get public buy-in. So we basically what we got is what we got. So what I want to do is go back and look at another alternative for this bridge that would reduce the cost.
How common is it to put the multi-use path through the middle of the DDI?
That's originally, when it was originally designed, the first one in the country in Missouri, that's where it was placed, in the middle of the road.
I haven't never been through one, but it strikes me, I would probably prefer not to go down the middle if I was walking or biking. But I wonder if this alternative is maybe.
It's got barrier on both sides. So you've got Jersey barrier on both sides. So it's not just a sidewalk in the middle of the road. It's basically, you've got directional traffic on either side, but you've got a barrier between the traffic and the pedestrian facility. It's a shared use path.
It's really about crossing where the lights are versus on the free flow, like off ramps that are coming off. Like that's the challenge of putting it all on the same side. But you're right, from the perspective of walking down the middle, it maybe doesn't feel as comfortable from the pedestrian perspective.
I think in a lot of applications, it is the most sensible. And I don't know about the project in Missouri, but I do know about the Brooklyn Bridge, and it seems to work pretty well there as well. So, you know, it just depends on where you are and what you're trying to do.
And it's just, basically was thinking we could just shift the travel lanes a little bit on the structure and to make room for the facility in the middle, but integrating the barrier into the bridge deck was a problem. The other thing is there's drop inlets that are in the edge of the travel lane. So you've got like a 6 foot or 5 foot sidewalk, and then you've got drop inlets that are in the travel, like right on the edge of the travel lane in front of the sidewalk. So basically, when you take out the sidewalk, you've got to basically relocate those drop inlets. And then you got to integrate those barrier in the bridge deck. And then there's a joint that runs down the middle of across the entire length of the bridge. So the combination of all three meant we had to replace the entire bridge deck. And that was the first thing that was a problem. And then once they start looking at the how it's integrated into the piers, they couldn't redesign it to integrate it the way it was designed. So they're going to have to replace the whole bridge. So that's why we ended up where we're at. Like I said, we didn't have enough time to go back and because it takes like 3 months to get from a public outreach to the final cost estimate. And so that's basically where we're at. And like I said, we're going to look at another alternative with the DDI, with a pedestrian bridge on a separate structure, and go through and resubmit it and reanalyze it. But that's a minor detail, but we still got to go through FHWA and get their approval. And that's going to be the bigger thing. Any questions other than what we talked about?
This is off topic, but do you know when they're going to complete the project down at Red Hill Road and Scottsville Road?
I'm not sure which project is this.
They're working on the bridge and the stream bank. I guess that would be the Hardware River there, down on Route 20 south in Carter's Bridge area.
That might be a bridge are they doing the bridge? That's a bridge project. I'm not familiar with that project. So I can't answer that question.
I just wondered.
They usually go pretty quick, but I don't know for sure how long that one's going to take. All right, I'll switch to the last presentation. Hopefully it'll load quicker.
That was the last one.
Right.
Yeah. Let's, the Ivy.
Ivy Road.
Check.
It's shorter, so hopefully it won't take as long to load. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, this is the or the pipeline study that we're wrapping up. We're still trying to finalize the final cost or the cost estimates, and then we should be wrapped up the study. Basically, this is the preferred alternative that ended up coming out of the study. Extension of the A-cell and D-cell lanes on the ramps on the north side of Old Ivy Road to facilitate the longer ramps so that we don't have queuing back out onto the mainline facility. The other thing is we're looking at is a roundabout at Boar's Head and a roundabout at Canterbury and the Midway or Market right there, right next to the underpass. And we're also going to put a median barrier between the roundabouts. So we'll close off those access points and use the roundabouts for the U-turn movements at Boar's Head from those businesses and residents on the north side. So the other thing it includes is a shared use path along Old Ivy Road. I think it's on the south side. It includes a bridge, a multimodal bridge across the bypass, parallel to the existing bridge that's there. And there's also some reconfiguration of the Franklin Street and the ramp and Old Garth Road, Old Ivy Road. So they're one-way streets instead of two-way. The other last thing is we're looking at reconfiguring the underpass and putting a shared elevated sidewalk underneath the underpass on the east end so that you can get under there safely as a pedestrian and a bicyclist, but we're still going to try to maintain two-way traffic through a signal. We'll see how it goes. There's some sight distance concerns there and that have been raised by traffic engineering as well as us that we'll see if we can make it work. If we can't, we may have to convert it to a one-way. But we'll try it and see if it's going to work first. And this is basically the preferred package of improvements from the study. Any questions about this? All right. Sorry to put you all to sleep, but we'll go on. These are some alternatives that we looked at west of Boar's Head that are going to be included as potential solutions that the locality may want to consider in the future if things start to become problematic at some of these locations. Based on the public feedback and what we got from the recommendations from the stakeholders group. But like I said, these are more long-term solutions if we start to see issues with some of these locations.
I'm never out that way. Is there a lot of traffic out that? It's bad.
It's bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of residential out this way, as well as commuters coming in from Crozet. But most of the traffic is mostly from this area or just west of this area. From Morgantown Road all the way in, Ivy and all there. There's a lot of residential development similar to this throughout this whole area that comes in and out this way. So you do have that morning and evening peak hours, and it's pretty much directional. We actually looked at, not with this study, in a previous study, we looked at reversible lane on this corridor. It's just how to get it to work with the left turns is always an issue with doing some of that. But that's something that we actually looked at one point. All right. And then on the east end, let's see, long-term for the middle of the corridor. Basically, this is in the future, based on some previous modeling that the MPO did for their long-range plan, the bypass starts to see significant growth in traffic volume. So to the point where we may need to look at widening the bypass to accommodate the additional traffic from Barracks Road south to the interstate. If we have to do that, we may have to look at replacing all these bridges and lengthening them so we can accommodate that widening. And that's just what this is. And this is like a very long-term type of solution for the center. It also, since the current railroad bridge is integrated into the actually roadway bridge, we would have to lengthen that, replace that bridge also, which would require us double tracking the railroad, which would mean we'd end up replacing the underpasses on both ends, which may be beneficial because we could address the issues that we have at both ends now. So, but this is a really long-term solution for these if we need to widen the road. And then this is the other section east of the interchange where we had some potential locations for improvements at several of these locations before you get to Old Ivy Road intersection. And like again, like the west side, this is more of a, yeah, if you want to consider it, these are some solutions that had good support by the public, but they're not really enough needs out there right now that we would currently recommend submitting them for funding. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, right now we're trying to wrap up the study. We're doing some planning level cost estimates. I mean, once we get those in and get those, we'll finalize the report and we'll be done. Any questions?
So this, once the preferred scenarios are selected, then this has to be submitted for funding somewhere in order for it to be actually put in place. Okay.
Yeah, for smart scale or something like that. The thing about it is, because of the changes in the regulations for smart scale, the regional bodies they can only submit interchange projects, capacity and expansion projects, or the entire recommendations of a study. So we wanted to try to craft the recommendations so that it would be something that the MPO would be eligible to submit, and it wouldn't be too costly for them to submit it.
Did you say there was a multi-use path?
Correct.
In, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It runs along it's this dotted line in the middle of the screen. It runs along Old Ivy Road from the underpass at Ivy Road on the east end all the way to Old Garth Road intersection.
So, okay, in the long term, I'm just curious about the long-term recommendations on either side of that. Did that include tying in multi-use paths, or was that for things?
We just looked at this portion of it. With the 3-notch trail study, I'm not even sure where they're going to run the trail. So I didn't want to put too much in, not knowing where they wanted to run the trail. Because once you get to the other side start to go to the west, you could have a different alignment than what we would choose. The east end is going to tie into the existing sidewalk, and I don't know if there's bike lanes on Ivy Road or what's on Ivy Road there to the east. But the underpass has only got a 6-foot wide sidewalk, I think is what was proposed, because that's all we can fit underneath the underpass. On the east end.
So
once you get underneath the underpass, you can share the road, I think, or there might be even bike lanes. I not off the top of my head, I don't recall.
There's bike lanes on that portion of Ivy toward the university.
Okay.
2 new hospitals. There's the orthopedic center and the Centauro one.
That's before the intersection of Old Ivy and Ivy.
It's right. And I'm trying to remember if the bike lanes.
They do.
Okay, yeah.
You at the signal, you can cross the road, so you can get to the other side. The bike lane's on the other side of the road. Then. All right. Any questions? That's pretty much it for me.
That's good.
All right, well, thank you, Chuck. We'll move on to any final comments from first members of the committee. And if not, then
I have just one reminder about the Move Safely Blue Ridge survey. It was covered on the 29 News as well. Yeah. I can provide the link in the chat for that as well.
Do you send it out through email? It's not easy to access the chat.
Sure, yeah.
I can send that in an email tomorrow. Yeah. With the posts of the Facebook post for the survey.
any matters from the public? I don't see any members of the public online, but nobody here, so.
You skipped one item, I think item 6 before the round table. Yeah.
Well, no, we did round table was
8.
Yeah, but we did skip 6.
And the numbers are off.
Yeah,
Supposed to be 7 and 8. Yeah, I guess the one sentence is the federal functional classification. The policy board approved last month, the proposed changes to the functional classification. That means it's in the hands of FHWA. Yeah, just for the record. And your next meeting, the CTAC, will be January 22nd. This will be an all virtual meeting we talked about last time.
Oh.
Yep.
with Donna's arrival, are we quorumed up? Nope.
No. Sadly.
That's all I got. No, but next
Hopefully
meeting, we should
next
have
meeting.
quorum. All right.
Next meeting virtual?
Yes.
Next meeting.
Why?
We just decided to do it.
Because it's January, because it's dark and cold.
I think that's what.
Good question.
Yeah, we're allowed up to 50% per year, so we decided to take that one at least because it's.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Not a pleasant time to go there, yeah. All right, so I think with that, we are adjourned. Very good. Right.
Oh, there's not nothing to go around the table.
Well, no, I asked, if there was
Wonderful.
no public comment.
Beautiful.
I actually have follow-up resources for both of you. The state has a vulnerable road users assessment plan, and I couldn't remember, but it does have very high level analysis of the infrastructure that presents the highest risk to pedestrian and bicycle vulnerable road user. Yeah. Correct. So it was things like two lanes or 4-lane roads, things like that. So that might.
They have like some sort of like algorithm where they assess like speed
also-
and infrastructure kind of
That
thing.
has this thing called it used to be called the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, but now I think it's called the Pedestrian Bicyclist Safety.
It's a vulnerable road user.
Oh, it's changed again, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a whole, like, it explains the process of how they did it, and then it shows you on maps where the priority locations.
So I can email this to the staff and they can send it out. And then the other thing that might be coming in the PDC's safety action plan that the state highway safety action plan does is they do this crosstab table with all of the different emphasis areas to show where there's correlation between like not wearing a seatbelt at an intersection.
Sandy, do you want to share your screen so folks on Zoom can see, or you can't?
Well, I mean, I can email this to you as well to send out to everybody.
Okay, I mean.
Yeah. So, I mean, the meeting was already adjourned, sorry, I was just,
Oh,
there
okay.
was like specific questions.
Thank you, sounds good.
Yeah,
Then we can start the recording.
yeah.